So Baruch Hashem, today's shiur is somewhat not entirely similar to what we're used to, and it's not nogea lahalocha at all, but it is a fascinating sugya, and it focuses on the concept of Kiyam Avraham Avinu kol haTorah kula ad shelo nitno. And obviously, according to Rashi in the beginning of this week's parsha, it is not only Avraham Avinu, but Yitzchak, Yaakov, and probably all the others, because Rashi, the beginning of the parsha, Imlovon Garti v'tar yag mitzvahs shamarti. And so Rashi emphasizes the number taryag, which goes even beyond what the Gemara says, Daf Chof Chesem et Beis in Yuma, Kiyam Avraham Avinu kol haTorah kula ad shelo nitno. So one of the sources in my Sefer, and I assume also in the source list, is a big chiddush of the Maharal Prague, and he says the Avos only observed mitzvahs aseh, not the lavin, but Rashi says taryag mitzvahs shamarti, and as we all know, taryag is the fullest. Reish mem ches mitzvahs aseh and shir samachay mitzvahs lo ta'aseh. And the big question all the Rishonim deal with, Ramban, Rashba, as we'll see as we move ahead, the big question is, so how do we reconcile Kiyam Avraham Avinu kol haTorah kula with Yaakov shenoso shtei achiyos? Shtei achiyos is an erve diuraisa, it's an iser korais. So how do we understand shtei achiyos with the assumption that Avraham Avinu was Makayim kol haTorah kula ad shelo nitno? So one of the first sources we have in our sheet is Tshuvas HaRamah. So the Ramah, very interestingly, the Ramah says, if we could have it on our screen, that would be beneficial. Tshuvas HaRamah, the Ramah says, it is only Avraham Avinu, not necessarily his children, his grandchildren. Tshuvas HaRamah Siman Yud. Baruch Hashem ish b'tzorayim. Ki Reb Yochanan lo medina mevietzav, soivish shebenoich enem esuvarak lishmar haminig hamidini v'ladun beinishu beinochav u'bein geiro mishpat yosher. So the focus, the main chiddush of the Ramah is dinem of bnei Noach is not necessarily our dinem. Dinem of bnei Noach means you need to establish a just, law-abiding society. Make your own laws. Dinim of Bnei Noach doesn't mean that they are subject to our Choshe Mishpat. It just means Chok HaNimusi. You need to establish a lawful, a law-abiding society, and not an anarchy, and not a cruel society, but a decent, law-abiding society, and that is what Dina means. And then there are more rights. V'yaf al gavdi dereshir neikav sheshom Avraham bekoili. Malamet sheshom rafilo eftav shilen. Em ken shma meneshoyo noye kefi haTorah v'amitzvah afilo mitzvah rabbanon. Makol makom nucha lo imar. Im hu shamar anshe beise lo yishamru. Rak achoik hanimusi hanimtza lohem. Sheva mitzvahs. The milan agodol b'adonenu Avinu Yaakov. So the Ramah proves from Yaakov Avinu, married shtei achiyos, that it was only Avraham. That was unique about Avraham. But the Ramah doesn't address Rashi. Rashi in this week's parsha, tar yag mitzvahs shomarti. So this Ramah doesn't fit in with Rashi. But let me just make a point. This is Agadah at the end of the day. And unlike halacha, in which every source, unless it has a contradiction, is binding, the concept of midrashas chalukos is very common when it comes to Agadah. So the Ramah deals with the Gemara, not with Rashi al Torah. The Gemara says, Kiyam Avraham Avinu kol haTorah kula ad shelo nitno, and the Ramah argues, we do not find that by others. So maybe it is only Avraham Avinu. And he proves his point from Yaakov shenoso shtei achiyos. He does not deal with Rashi. that says Taryag Mitzvahs Shamarti. And in the first section of our Shira, we'll see various fascinating different approaches. How do we interpret the concept of Kiyam Avrom Avinu Kol HaTorah Kulat Shalin? And many times I ask, Afilu Erev Tavshilan. So was Avrom Avinu Boki in all the Bir Halachas in DNA Erev Tavshilan, all the details in Bir Haloch and Hilchos Yom Tov, Chaya Adam or the Garshaz, Shechanu HaRav and Chaya Adam, all the details. What did he use for Erev Tavshilan? Did he use fish? Did he use an egg? So let's move forward and first have a look at the Ramban. Rosh HaMedavrim B'Kol Mokoim. So the Ramban, dealing with Shtei Achiyos, I think it's Parshas Toldos. Let's have a look at the Ramban. I think we need to scroll up to the beginning of our source sheet. Here, it's this Ramban. Eikev Hashem Avrom B'Koili. V'yesh mishmarti mitzvosai chukoisai v'tereisai. So, mishmarti, he quotes Rashi, Gzeres la'archoka, Shnias la'arayas, Shus l'shabes, mitzvosai, mitzvah shirin ha'nechtem v'nedeshoto, Gezer shrichazah, mechukoisai, Chilas chaza, levishes shatnes, Toraisai, Torah shemal peh. So Rashi seems to indicate that Avraham Avinu was into all the details, the various different categories of mitzvahs, and even Torah shemal peh. However, interesting.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I ask the Rav to align the screen a little bit better? Because the Rav is a little bit too close to the screen, and I push the screen up a little bit to align it a little better.
Just a moment. Just a moment. Let me rearrange. Is this better? Reb Shlomo, are we connected?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it's better. Yes, Rav, it's better. It's the normal configuration now.
Okay. Should I start from the beginning?
No, absolutely not. It's fine.
Okay. So Ramban quotes Rashi, and Rashi seems to indicate all the details. Mishmarti, mitzvosai, chikoisai, teroisai. However, I just want to point out, teroisai, lo avi Torah shemal peh, alocha leMoshe miSinai. So Rashi seems to skip the derabonans, and even when he says teroisai, Torah shemal alocha leMoshe miSinai. However, the Gemara says Erev Tavshilan, and that doesn't seem to be on Rashi's list. But let's have a look at the Ramban. Im ken yakol zaboni al dasho Avraham Avinu mekayim mishamas haTorah shelino, v'kach amru beBereishis Rabo, v'yitanam Yosef Agolois sheperesh parshas Eglah Harifa. So the Ramban goes beyond Avraham Avinu, beyond Yaakov, and he quotes what the Medrash says about Yosef HaTzadik. V'yesh lishel. Im ken eich hikim Yaakov matzevo v'nosa shtei achiyos. So that's the big question. Shtei achiyos. And then the Ramban, in the continuation, says, maybe Kol HaTorah Kula means only Shabbos. Shkula Shabbos keneged Kol HaTorah Kula. I think we need to go over to the second column of the Ramban. Adjust the screen, the second column. So the Ramban has an interesting interpretation. He says maybe Kol HaTorah Kula means Shabbos. וביעקב דורש שומר ששבס כל בתחומים, ואיפה שיהיה זה בשבס שקולה כנגד כל התורה כולו, ואולי נאמר משמרתי שניאס לרועיס של בני נוח מצווסי גבש יחשומם חוקויסי איבה מנחי וקליים. Maybe it only means שאלו כולו נסתבו בני נוח. והוא השומר ואויסר את צוין בוירו ימשמר את הדקדוקה וחמורה שבמצווה שלהם. So this is an interpretation of the Ramban, ignoring the Gemara in Yom Daf Chof Ches. Now, this is very common by Rabbi Seinu Harishonim. When the Mefarish Torah Shebechsav, it is not always al pi Mesoires Chazal. So first the Ramban deals according to Rashi. And then he says, Ulai Noimar, there are all these details. Mishmarti, mitzvoisai, chukoisai, toroisai, are all the chumras and all the dikdukim of Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. And then we continue with the Ramban, and then the Ramban, going on, next paragraph, Gevaldig, Vanera elai medas rabeseinu, shalom adavrom avinu Torah kula beruach hakodesh, vasak bar betama mitzvah v'soido seil, ושומר אויסה כמי שאינה מצווה ואויסה, ושמרו עושה אויסה בארץ ישראל בלבד. So, the Ramban says, we could understand Kiyum Avrum Avinu Kol HaTorah Kula, not the details. Tami HaMitzvahs, Soides HaTorah, Soides HaKabbalah, and maybe only in Eretz Yisrael did he observe the mitzvahs with all their details. And the Ramban Lishitosai, and he sends us to another Ramban in Pashas Achrei Mois. Probably we have it on the screen.
Yes, we're going to shrink it a little bit, Rav Mordechai. It's in the next page.
The Ramban explains why Rochel needed to die as he came into Eretz Yisrael. It's a sad Ramban. But according to the Ramban explains, because in Eretz Yisrael, the Avos were Mekayim, the Torah, al kol proteo v'dikdukeo, not in Chutz La'aretz. And that's why it was heavenly decree. As Yaakov comes to Eretz Yisrael, it causes the demise of Rochel Imenu, because in Eretz Yisrael he could no longer have Shtei Achiyos. And the Isser of Shtei Achiyos is only b'chayein. When one sister passes away, you could mother her sister. There was some great Gedolim that when the wife passed away, married wife's sister. Amongst them, I think that the late Novominsker Rebbe Zecher Tzadik Levrocha, whom we all so much knew and admired, I think he married his wife's sister after his wife passed away. So. Correct. That is why Rochel needed to pass away, because in Eretz Yisrael Yaakov was Makayim the mitzvahs al kol proteim v'dikdukein. And the Ramban is Shitos in Parshas Achrei Mois when the Ramban explains that the essence of Torah is in Eretz Yisrael.
Next page.
This is a very interesting Ramban, and many are confused with this Ramban. The Ramban has no practical implication or application. And we're chayev in kol ha-mitzvahs she'enon tluyos ba'oretz and chutz la'aretz exactly as we're chayev in Eretz Yisrael. But in pnimius, in essence, the Ramban says, Torah was given in Eretz Yisrael. This is such a profound thought of the Ramban. And the Ramban explains כל הדר בארץ ישראל דומה כמי שיש לו אלוקה. הדר בחוץ לארץ דומה כמי שאין לו אלוקה. And the Ramban explains, the essence of Torah is in Eretz Yisrael, not only mitzvahs tluyos ba'aretz, even mitzvahs she'enon tluyos ba'aretz. And the chiyuv in chutz la'aretz is secondary, is supplementary to the chiyuv in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, we are bound by halacha. And by halachic criteria, Mitzvahs she'enon tluyas ba'oretz are binding in chutz la'aretz as well. But l'fnei shenitnu Torah, when the Avos were mekayim the mitzvahs k'mi she'enon mitzvah v'oisa voluntarily, and they understood the pnimius of the mitzvahs, that is why it is only in Eretz Yisrael that they observe the mitzvahs bepratein v'dikdukein. In chutz la'aretz, they learned the Weiss tamia mitzvahs, soidos Torah, the pnimius of mitzvahs, but not in their detailed form. So that is a very fundamental idea of the Ramban. So that's the approach of the Ramban. I would suggest now hopping over some sources and going over to the Rashba, because the Ramban and the Rashba are the giants of yore, and they come before, the Chassam Sofer and the Or Chaim and others. I would suggest skipping to Tshuvas HaRashba. So the Rashba, in a Tshuva...
You went too far. There you go.
Here we are. That we have the Rashba on our screen, I think.
Yes.
She'omru ki kiyam Yaakov Taryag mitzvahs v'nirmas b'milas imloman garati v'hik shaloi hayach kaimo v'daino nistav avoid Yaakov nosu shtei achiyos da ki yomru kiyam Avinu afilu erev tavshilin d'chsiv v'yishma mishmarti mitzvahs v'rekois v'teroi al tetama ki kvar nes'erarto atu radas ki em b'kol proti ha-mitzvahs she'einu ramezet el anyoni ha-chochmo v'shechivu ha-chochmo. It is the pnimius HaChochma that necessitates both the mitzvahs and both the lo ta'aseh, both the active and both the passive mitzvahs. V'masav ha'maniya moidios, ma she'nirmaz behem min HaChochma. V'oves higiu b'rov chochmos meno ikra ma'im, k'moi she'omru zal b'avom, shteikel yosef mabias le'chochma, כשני מלמדם, וכן כל האובס, עד שיהודה מקובל מאבויס אף קיים מיסס ייבום, אף על פי שעדיין לא נסתבו וציבה לבנוי. ועל אשר נושא יעקב שתיח ויסדע, שהתורה נכון על 3 עמודים, זמן, מקום, כלים. This Rashba is fascinating, but the way I understand the Rashba clearly says, even in Eretz Yisrael, Chazal do not mean that Avraham Avinu was Mekayim all the details and the protim of Taryag mitzvahs. So when I asked before, does Erev Tavshilin mean that Avraham Avinu had the Shulchan Aruch HaRav and the Chayodim and the Bi'alach? Yes, was he familiar with the Chavetz Chaim, all the protidin, Mogen Avraham and Taz? The Rashba says it all boils down to Pnimius. All the mitzvahs stem from Chochma. Chochma essentially meaning Chochma Pnimis. And all the mitzvahs are necessitated by Chochma, and they all lead to Chochma. And all the Torah is subject, time, space, Kalim, Zman, Mokim, Kalim. Hazman, לא כל היום המסורים במלאכה כשבס ויום טוב, ולא יסורים בחומץ כפסח, ולא חיובים בסוכה ולולב כחג. מוקוים, לא יהיה בכל מקום חיוב מתומס המייסס ועשינו מתארו כי עץ ישראל, ולא חיובים בקרבונס כבייס הבחירו. והכלי, לא יהיה בכל דבר יועצם תמורה סלולה ועסק, ולא יהיה כל דבר מקריבים כבוקו וצוין. ואין יוכל לפרש יויסו, והמסכל על דבר ימצא. It is like a code that we need to decipher. But the way I understand the Rashba, all the mitzvahs depend on time, space, substance, objects. And this paragraph in Rashba goes back to the previous paragraph. It's all about Pnimius. So I once again draw the distinction between Lifnei Matan Torah and Achar Matan Torah. La'achar Matan Torah we have halacha, and we abide to halacha. Whether you understand the Pnimius or not is not relevant. What is binding is halach. But we need to understand all the mitzvahs go back to Pnimiyah Sachach. And that is why some mitzvahs are totally dependent on time. To the fundamental human being, what is the difference between one day and another? You ask a guy, you ask an atheist, what's the difference between one land and the other, one day and the other, one object or the other? But in Torah is saying what doshu, yes. One object is not similar to the other, one space is not like the other, and one time is not like the other. Do we understand? No. But that is our Kabbalah Ma'aviseinu. And the Rashba writes all this to explain the essence of Kiyum HaMitzvahs Lefnei Matan Torah. Lefnei Matan Torah, halacha wasn't binding. Torah was. Pnimius was. And I think what the Ramban says about the Kiyum HaMitzvahs in Chutz La'aretz, the Rashba extends even in Eretz Yisrael. The way the Avos were Mekayim the mitzvahs was totally different than the way we are obliged Lachash in the Torah. Radbaz tries to explain the Rashba. We scroll down just a few lines and we'll briefly look at the Radbaz. So the Radbaz was 300 years younger than the Rashba. Sha'altu mimeni yoidi Yaakov kavonas Rashba b'tshuva. And he quotes the Rashba. Im kefi anera mepshat l'shoinoi lefi she'ba'ois zman adayin lo nitne Torah. So he clearly says fundamentally what I explained. Ba'ois zman adayin lo nitne Torah. Davar ze lo yotzorach lastiroi. The adayin akush b'mkol mamedes. Ovus kima kol hamitzvos. Kol shken erev hachamira. Tshuva. Hine ato oiches ba'or pi lahoitzi ma she'en li chayfetz va'al api. כדי שלא לא יצייח או חולק, ארמויז לכל המזס עד שתומן דברי הרב. הוא סתם אותם בסוף לשון שאומר, לא ראוי להקרב ככהן, לא ראוי מסשתיחס כי יעקב, לפי שצורוסי חקוקה בכיס יעקב. טעם הרויס כדי שלא ישתמש בשרביטו של מלך. נחלס ינקב נחלה בלימצור ומשתמש בשתיחס ליה ברוחו, ואם יודעת או לא מזוך סרוחר בכובע מועס המכפלה ברוחר פרוש זוכם טוב אין סוד שתי יחיס. ואחר כל זה הרמז יודעתי שתמצא שבוע של הרב ונסחר ונדיע לשואל סוידו עניין אם הוא מאסקר. So when we learn that at Baz, we're even more confused than when we learn the Rashba. And he says it is all Soidus. But he says something which is fascinating and even frightening. The Aroyas are ein ra'ui le'shtamish b'sharbito shel melech. Yaakov Avinu had the permission to be mishtamish b'sharbito shel melech. So anyway, this is Kabbalah. But what is clear from the Rashba, that the way to understand Kiyum HaMitzvahs of the Avos is not in the classical form, with all the details of halacha. And I think that is also the nefesh hachayim. So I don't know how our source sheet is organized, but I would like to go over, I'm not familiar with this source.
We have the nefesh hachayim. Everything is here. Just give us the Rav, give us a second, and we'll put up the nefesh hachayim. It's right here.
Shlomo, I assume that you have sources that you did not take from my sefer, and that's great.
We have a few more than the Rav sources, but most of them overlap. It's printed in a more accessible form here. We do both.
Okay. So the Nefesh HaChaim speaks about the hashpah of mitzvahs and how every mitzvah brings about a tikkun. And Sefer Hasidus talk a lot about tikkunim and yichudim. And then comes the third paragraph on our screen. וזו גם כל עניין אבדוסם של האובוס. וכל הצדיקים הראשונים שקיום את התורה קודם לסינוסו, כמו שדורש חז"ל על הפוסק מן הבהמה טהורו, מכאן שלא בנויח טהורו, כי הם עברו מכל התורה כולה עד שלא ניתנו. לא ישאויו מצווים ואויסם כך מצד הדין, ואם כן לא היו מעמידים חס ושלום על דעתם והשגוסם. אף שהשיגו שלפי עניין שורש נשמוסם, ההכרח להם לעבור ולשנויס, אף מקצס מאחס מכל המצוות. ולא היה יעקב נויסה שתי אחריוס, ולא היה עמרם נויסה. Could we move up? So actually, רק מצד הסגוסם, בתויר שכלום התיקונים הנרואים הנעשם על המצוות באוילמס וכוחס עליונים ותחתונים, והפגומם הגדולים והחורבן שיגרמו, הם לא יקיימו. וכן, נויה חיסק בכוח השורש ובעליון על כל בהמה וחי, איזה מהם שורש נשמוסי. ולכן, כשיעשה יעקב אבינו, שלפי שורש נשמוסי יגם תיקונים גדולים, בכוחס ואוילמס עליונים איזה שתי אחריוס, והם הוא יבן שתיהם את בית ישראל, Yoga kama yagias vavoidis lasigam shienasу lo. So once again, Nefesh HaChaim explains the Avos were not obliged to be makayim the mitzvahs kehelchosam. Rather, lefi shorish nishmosam to be metaken tikunim. And I think the Nefesh HaChaim fits onto the Rashba. And it is a total different approach to Kiyam Avram Avinu Kol HaTorah Kula Ad Shelo Yinino. And from here, I want to go to Balatoistus and Igrois HaRabba. Balatoistus, Dazikenim, who also...
On page 9, it's under the Rashba, on page 9. Is that the Rav means, which one? Vayikumo Nachmoi, Ki Eredem B'nai Sha'ol, Lamed Zayin, Lamed Hey, I think. Let's see. Is this the one the Rav means?
This is not the one I saw. I saw the short version. This is Balatoistus.
Yeah, this is about
okay,
the
yeah,
long
it's
version.
It's here. In the middle column. Kim Avram Avinu, Filu Eftav Shilan, Gam Mitzasim Hayu Makaimin, Hayaches Votem Nosech Hussein, Megam Yankam Nosech Vies Loima. Ki Ma'acha Shalom Nitztav Ol HaTorah, Afar B'Shiadu B'Ruach HaKodesh, Ma Shelo Yeroitzem Hayu Makaimin, Ma Shelo Yeroitzem Hayu Menichin.
What does that mean?
This is very strange. Does he mean independent, whether they were up to it? No, it's impossible. I think when he writes Masho Yeroitzim, Mashelo Yeroitzim, it means Lefi Masha Hisigu Beruach Kodsham Lefi Shoirish Nishmasam. It's not, when he fell in love with his wife's sister, he decided to marry her, Chas v'sholom. When he writes Masho Yeroitzim, he means with the Ruach Kodsham, the Fishorish and Shmosam, and they understood what are the Tikkunim ba'olam eselyanim, exactly what the Nefesh HaChaim explains. And I think that is what the Rashman, the Radbaz try to conceal.
1 second, please.
So I think that is how we need to learn Balei HaTosfos. Which brings us to a letter of the Rambam. And then Orach Chaim. Igris Rambam, we should have it. So when we learn these sources, we need to understand a profound thought about Shemiras and Mitzvahs generally. I'm just sharing an idea with you till we have the Rambam on the screen. Yes, Halacha reigns supreme. And a Jew needs to be Mekayim Halacha. But we should not forget that there's Pnimius in Torah. The only way to achieve those tikkunim are by totally observing halacha. But each and every one of these mitzvahs has an effect on our neshamas, and it has an effect on oilemis elyonim. And that is the difference between la'achar shenitna Torah. The only way to achieve what must be achieved is by hilchosein v'dikdukein. Lifnei shenitna Torah was a totally different ballgame. And each of those giants understood the Fishorish Nishmasai in a very personal level what he needs to do, as if each and every one of them had his own Torah and his own route and his own passage and his own road, how to achieve what he needs to achieve. So let's learn this Rambam because it's fascinating. מה ששאלתו על האומויס, הווה יודע, תרחמונה לי בבוי, ואחרי כמון הסלד הם הדבוי. ועל כן אמרו חכמי ואמס רבסנו, חסידו ומסולי ושנה חלק ירם הבא, אם השיגו מה שראוי להשיג מידי הסבוירה, והתקינו נפשם במידס הטוידס, והם בדוב הסופק, שכל מי שהתקן נפשם בקשתס המידס וקשתס החוכמו, באמונס הבורי יסבורך, בבד הוא מבני וילם הבא. ועל כן אמרו חכמים ואמס רבסנו אפילו גוי ויוסי בתורה ראו ככהן גדול. וכל העצמי של דובו, והמגמה בתורס מוישה רבנו, תיקון הנפש של הבורי יסבורך. כמו שאומר דוד, שביזה שהמגמת כי מימיני בעל אמון. So the Rambam says, the Umesu Oilam, how would they achieve their shleimus and be zoichet to Chai Olam Haba? By believing in a Kodesh Baruch Hu, rectifying their midas, be mekayim their mitzvahs, and even for us, the Torah has a purpose. It has a purpose to bring about our shleimus and tikkun olam. And then the Rambam quotes the chashivas of midas Torahs. And it brings various anecdotes. וכן אמרו חכמו אמס, מה שעשו חוכמה כסר הראשו, עשו ענו ועקב לסנדולו, and the midas Torahs. And could we scroll down, ובוודאי כגון זהו במעלס ועליונים, וזה רוצן התורה וחוכמה המצווה, להתקן הנפש במידותיו ובאמונס הבוירה. ואין בזה ספק, now comes the punchline, ואין בזה ספק, שהאבוס ונוח ועודם הראשון שלא ישמרו כלל דברי התורה, לא יהיו בני גהנם. אלא ודאי, כיוון שהגיעו והשיגו מה שראוי להשיג בחוכמה ואמס, וודאי התקינו נפשם בכל מה שראוי להתקין, בריהם במעלה או עליונו. How does he write? Avos, Noach va'odam harishon? Yes, Noach agreed. Odam harishon agreed. But how does he write Avos? Lo yishamru klal es divrei haTorah. Goes against the Gemara ki Avinu kol haTorah kula shelo nitno. So the Rambam, Bali HaTosfos, Rashba, Radbaz, Nefesh HaChaim, all these fit in to a new approach. Does not mean the detailed mitzvahs, it means pnimius. And those giants understood lefi shorish nechmasa, the ruach kodsham, what is their duty, while they were perfect their neshamis, their midas, their hasagas in elokus, and that is the way they were mekayim kol Torah. So because I elaborated on this approach, I just want to stress there is another approach as well, and that is the classical one that interprets Divrei Chazal kipshuto. Yes, Chazal mean that Avraham Avinu was mekayim all the details, the protim and the pirta protim, and that is why they struggled with the Shtei Achiyos. And that the Ramban is machalek between Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. in the very same approach. Now, the Rambam in this letter might be questionable because the letters of the Rambam are not necessarily as authentic as the Mishnah Torah is. And if we scroll up to the top of this page, this Igeres, other way, top of this page, just to the top of this same page, I want you to have a look at the caption, Igeres Misupokos. So this Igeres is not 100% known to be authentic. Some of the letters of the Rambam were proven to be 100%. I believe this is an authentic letter. But what I argued in my Sefer Rambam Lishitosay Mishneh Torah, and that's the next source we have on our page if we scroll down. I think the Rambam is actually Lishitosay.
Can the Rav explain again, what does the Rambam mean when he says Lakim was Torah Klal? What does that mean?
That means they did not observe Protei HaMitzvahs L'Dikdukeihem. Not at all.
So the Rambam is chelik on the Pshat in the Gemara, the Rambam is chelik on the Pashup Pshat of Erev Tavshilin?
The Rambam is not totally new. You know, we brought the Rashba, and the essence of the Rashba and the Radbaz is their Kiyum was different than our Kiyum. The Chazal don't mean at all that they were Mekayim, the mitzvahs, the Protein, the Dikdukeiim, just the Pnimius. Like the Ramban explains, Kiyum amitzvahs b'chutz la'aretz, contrary to Eretz Yisrael, and like the Rashba generally says, Shtei achiyos yankevnu beruach hakodesh, that's the tikkun, that's his tikkun, and that's exactly what the Nefesh HaChaim explains. That is the way I interpret the Rambam. Lo shamru es a Torah klal. They weren't observing the details of each and every mitzvah. They were Oisek and Soides HaTorah and Pnimius HaMitzvahs and the Tikkunim. So the Rambam goes at great length to explain all the mitzvahs essentially are about perfecting one's neshama and bringing a person to shleimus. And when we observe all the mitzvahs with their details, the result is the shefa that these mitzvahs are mashpia on all the olamis and on our own neshamas. And therefore the Rambam writes, the Avos and Noach and other Marisha achieved the same goal in their own way. And fundamentally, what the Nefesh HaChaim explains HaRav, the nature of Kiyum HaTorah la'achar shenitna Torah is different than Kiyum HaMitzvahs lifnei shenitna Torah. Lifnei shenitna Torah, each and one of these giants was on his own, and he was Makayim the mitzvah lefi shoresh nishmasoi veruach kodshoy. That is my formula. I cannot give a better formula. Lefi shoresh nishmasoi veruach kodshoy. La'achar shenitna Torah, there is only one way to achieve what we need to achieve, and that is halacha. Kiyum hamitzvahs beprutein v'dikdukein lefi yesoides ha'halacha. That is la'achar shenitna Torah, and that is the way I explain Das Ekenim Abali HaTosfos, the Rambam, the Rashba and the Radbaz, and that is clearly what the Nefesh HaChaim says.
So in other words, they're all learning that Erev Tavshilin is dogma, mashal for something else. Doesn't necessarily mean every prat.
No, it means the pnimius atikunim of the Israel Tzorah Mishos Lishos and Erev Tavshilin. It means Erev Tavshilin, but not Erev Tavshilin with its details. But even the mitzvahs that Rabbanan have pnimius. And it means the others were metakim tikunim and meyachid yechudim lefi shorish nishmosa veruach kodsham and tami hamitzvahs v'soidoiseihem. And it goes all the way back to the first Ramban we saw. Tame HaMitzvahs v'Soidei saying. That's what the Avos did in Chutz La'aretz. But according to the Ramban in Eretz Yisrael, they were mekayim the details. But the Rambam and Bali Toises and the Rashba do not differentiate between Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. So what do I mean, Rambam Rishitosai? Let's learn the beginning of Perek Tes, Hilchos Malachim. Al Shish Dvorim Nitztava Odom Arish. Al Avodah Zorah Al Berachos Hashem Al Shlichus Domam Al Gili Arayos Al Gezer Al Adina. Afar Pi Shekuran Kebola Biyadenu Me'Moshe Rabbeinu. Vadasno Itelehem. Machlal Divrei Torah Yira. Shal Eilen Nitztavu. Hoysef L'Noyachei V'Menachai. שנהם הבוסר בנפשי דומה לא יסריך לו, נמצאו 7 מצוות. וכן היו הדובר בכל העולם עד אברהם, בו אברהם, ונצטווה ויסר אלה במילה. And now the Rambam switches to a different formula. והוא הספלל שחס. יצחק יפרש מעשה והויסף תפילה אחרת לפני ערב. Yaakov Hoysev Gidanosha ve'espalel arves. Ispalel arves. Yitzchak Ifresh Maisa. What do you mean Yitzchak Ifresh Maisa? Wasn't he Makayim Kol Torah Kulo? What do you mean Avrom Ispalel Shachris? If he was Makayim, Erev Tavshilin, didn't he daven Mincha and Marav? Who is Palil Shachris? The Rambam doesn't write Tika in Shachris. He's Palil Shachris. Yitzchak Yivresh Masav is Palil Mincha. Yaakov is Palil Arvis. But weren't they Mekayim Berchas Ilonis and Berchas Torah Mea Brochas Bakol Yoim and Oisa Masav Bereishis and I thought the others were Mekayim Kol Torah Kula, even the Rabbans. This Rambam is Lishitosoi. No. When Chazal say, Kiyam Avrom Avinu Kol Torah Kula Ad Shalani, it's not the details. It's not the way we are Mekayim Mitzvahs. So this Rambam proves the authenticity of that letter. Yitzchak Yifresh Maisa. Because the Pasuk says, V'nosan Loi Maisa Mekol. But he wasn't Mekayim all the other mitzvahs. This Rambam, so the people that are shocked by the Igeres need to analyze this halacha in the Rambam. Avram hispalel shachas means he didn't daven mincha marav. Sheloi kedivre atoises b'brochas chavav. The oifen that Avram Avinu was makayim kol Torah kula is pnimius. Soides Torah tikunim yechudim, but not the details. As I said, this is the Mahalach of the Nefesh HaChaim, but there are many different interpretations as well. So I would suggest, let's move fast forward. The Maral in Gurari has a fascinating approach. The Maral says the others were only Makayim mitzvahs to say, not mitzvahs lo ta'aseh. Oh,
back to the. Here we go.
We can have the Maral and Mincha Sosha. I quote the Maral, or we have the Maral.
It's here. The original is here.
Okay. So the Maral has a profound argument, and he says, when you're Mekayim mitzvahs, kemisha eina mitzvah v'oisa, it is out of ahava. Ahava necessitates kum v'asei. The Lavan are associated with Yira, not with Ahava. And that is already the Ramban and Parshas Yisrael. The Ramban explains, why do you say Mitzvah Sasei Dochelo Ta'aseh? Because Midas Ahava is greater than Midas Yira. And all the Mitzvah Sasei stem from Ahava. Lo Ta'aseh stem from Yira. So the others, the Fnei Matan Torah, were only Mekayim the mitzvahs asay. L'chen oyamita l'shimon lisu achoyso levadei, k'mo shenoldu b'nei yodam kol echad ta'oimo. And that is al pi riach HaKodesh. Is this the section I was quoting?
Is the Rav looking for the mitzvahs say?
Yes, I'm looking for the difference between Mrs. Sase and Mrs. Lotas. I think this section of the Maral is the same as we quoted before from other sources, from the Nefesh HaChaim. It all depends on the Ruach HaKodesh, but I'm looking for the
It goes a little further. It's on the second page, I believe.
I'm looking for the Gur Aryeh, which differentiates Mrs. Sase and Mrs. Lotas.
Here it is. It's here, HaRav.
Which column?
On the bottom right.
Here it is. The bottom,
bottom right, the middle
yes.
Right now, I guess it is. You see the Rav says Dafka Mitzvah Say.
Right.
On the first column.
Aval mitzvahs ki dafka mitzvahs say the eshel ze sachar. Aval mitzvahs lo tes shein ki b'schar mitzvahs lo. It says a matter shlo nistavo lo miyakaimo. Okay, so I need to apologize to you. The Maral differentiates between mitzvahs say and mitzvahs lo ta'aseh, but I do not agree with his interpretation. The Maral writes, only mitzvahs say you have schar, not mitzvahs lo ta'aseh. I don't understand why. Of course he gets schar by lavim. Yosef lo yover avera, malan olav ki ilu as a mitzvah. When you abstain from wrongdoing, you get schar. So I want to offer a different interpretation to the asad of the Maral. The Maral says the Avos were only Mekayim mitzvahs say, not mitzvahs lo ta'aseh. Because the mitzvahs say you get sachar. Mitzvahs lo ta'aseh, you don't get a reward. So why would you do the mitzvahs? I don't understand b'chlal this sprach. The Avos did mitzvahs not because they wanted sachar. And I also argue that of course he gets schar for lavim. They're mitzvahs. You get schar for every mitzvah. My approach would be based on the Ramban. Mitzvahs say derive from ahava. Mitzvahs lo ta'aseh from yira. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't give us lo ta'aseh, then we have nothing to be afraid of. We're not over anything. You're not going to be punished, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't be angry. He can't be angry because he didn't require us to be Mekayim lo ta'aseh. But we're making him happy when we're Mekayim mitzvahs asay. So I want to explain the Maral's Yesod with a different interpretation, with a different approach. I can't agree with the Maral says, Mrs. Lota says you don't get sachar. Of course you get sachar. A mitzvah is a mitzvah, whether it's kum v'aseh or sheval taisa. And you get sachar for every mitzvah. And sometimes lavin are a far greater nesoyan than mitzvahs asay. Erva. Sometimes a person is infatuated with a woman, but he knows he can't touch her. She's a niddah. That's a lav. And sometimes it's a far greater nesoyan than mitzvahs asay. You're in a prison cell. You're dying from hunger, but the food isn't kosher. It's a gewaldige nesoyan. So how would the Maral say you don't get sachar for lav? And of course you get sachar for lav. My approach would be a different one. The lavin come from yira. But if you're not mechuyev, you have nothing to be afraid about. Because Baruch Hu won't be angry at you, but you still could make him happy. When you bring a beautiful gift for your friend, you don't owe him anything. He didn't expect you to give him. He can be angry if you won't give him a gift, but you're making him happy. The Avos wanted to make HaKadosh Baruch Hu happy, and that is midas avo. And that is why they only were Mekayim Esen and not Lavan. And that's a new approach and a new teretz to the kasha of Shtei Achiyos. So my dear friends, this is a fascinating discussion, and we can go on and on and on. And all of you...
Can HaRav explain Reb Chaim to us before we close?
Yes. So Reb Chaim has a very important yesod. Reb Chaim deals with the question of what was the status of the Avos Lefnei Matan Torah. The Mishnah Lamelech was one of the fathers of alumnus wrote a sefer called Precious Drochi. And 80% of the sefer deals with the question, what was the status of the Avos Lifnei Shenitna Torah? On our screen right now, we have the Nefesh HaChaim. That's not Reb Chaim. So most of the Precious Drochim deals with the question, what was the status of the Avos Lifnei Matan Torah? B'nai Noach or B'nai Yisrael? Reb Chaim says, the question is only what was the din of the Avos. But Kedushas Yisrael definitely starts with the Avos HaKadosh. Reb Chaim is brisk, and brisk can't talk without Gavra and Cheft. Everything in brisk needs to use the terms Gavra and Cheft. So Reb Chaim says, V'Chefze, the Avos were Yisrael. B'din, maybe they didn't have a din Yisrael. I phrase it in my words, and I say, din Yisrael is a question. Kedushas Yisrael is beyond doubt. Who had Kedushas Yisrael more than Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Avosenu HaKadoshim. In essence, they were Jewish, unlike Noach and other Marishim. But the fundamental question is it Shayach Din Yisrael Lifnei Shenitnu Torah Yisrael? There was no Din Yisrael because Din Yisrael is Torah Moshe. Torah Moshe was given by Ma'amad Har Sinai. So what Reb Chaim comes to explain, the question is not whether the Avos were Jewish or not. The question is only Din Yisrael. What set of dinim did they have? That is the discussion that we find in the Gemara and the Rishonim and Precious Drochim. But in Chefze, and if we want to translate Chefze to English, in essence, the Avos were Jews. The way I define it, Kedushas Yisrael started with the Avos HaKadoshim. But the question still is, did they have a din Yisrael? Is Shayach din Yisrael? Lefnei shenitnu din Yisrael. Lefnei shenitnu Torah Yisrael. Could one have a din Yisrael? That is the essence of Reb Chaim's argument. So any one of you that really wants to be misamek more in the sugya, I could just suggest that you learn the Siman and Minchas Osher. It's a fascinating Siman, and it touches upon many, many nakudas that we didn't even begin to mention today. But I hope the shiur was interesting. It's a fascinating sugi, even though most of us, it's not really negeh halacha l'maaseh, but droish v'kaval sachar, yagdel Torah v'yad.
Okay.